move the thumb. I need to see. Hey, look at that. Or alternatively, Fria Ligen in 2022. Say it again. Walk smart, you frail blade of Dagnabbit. Today's story begins almost 45 years ago in 1980, a time that undoubtedly seems ancient to some of you and all too short a time ago to others. Friedrich Malmberg, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, had just moved to the United States to work. You see, Mr. Malmberg was one of the founding members of the Swedish company Target Games. Friedrich came over to my side of the Atlantic to ship American war games home to the rest of Target Games in Sweden for sale. While in the States, he started doing some extra work for American game publishers and thereby became familiar with the new kind of games that were absolutely eating up the wargaming market in the USA, role-playing games. Indeed, Friedrich became well acquainted with this new hobby. He worked as one of the game testers for storied games like Call of Cthulhu and Stormbringer, read the Worlds of Wonder manuscript before its release, and rented a room from Steve Perrin, a designer who wrote and worked on truly all kinds of rules for all sorts of games. Immersed as he was in the role-playing games, Mr. Malmberg saw within this new hobby an opportunity unavailable to himself and his co-founders with war games, namely that of production. You see, while D&D and other similar games had made some inroads in the Swedish gaming market, the language barrier had proved potent and was keeping role-playing from reaching the same level of financial or cultural success as it was seeing in the States. So Target Games created the company's publishing arm, Winterspiel, and licensed some Chaosium products to create one of the most definitive tabletop role-playing games to ever come out of Sweden, and there have been a few. Drakar och Demoner, or as it would come to be called by English-speaking audiences years later, Dragonbane. Now, this simply gorgeous box I have in my midst is obviously not the original edition of the game. Indeed, Drakar och Demoner would go through 7 editions before arriving at its current version, which was crowdfunded by the truly impeccable company Fria Ligen. Well, you're trying, there's no doubt. I'm certainly doing my best. As a huge Free League fan, I jumped on it and have absolutely loved it ever since. Now that we've talked about the game's history, let's talk about the core of how Dragonbane runs. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to use my dead character Grimm's sheet. I'll use the backside of the sheet to run through character creation in the next video. Like player characters in many games made in the image of 80s-inspired fantasy role-playing, Dragonbane PCs have 6 attributes that form the core foundation of your character. These will look familiar to players coming over from 5e to Pathfinder, but there are, in fact, some significant departures that I would have you keep in mind. For example, Constitution here is your hit points. So if you put a 6 into Constitution, you'll have 6 hit points with which to cling to life in a game where daggers deal D8 hit points worth of damage. Walk smart, you frail blade of grass. Another example, willpower, which isn't analogous to any stat in most trad fantasy games. Like hit points, willpower gives you a depletable resource that your character will rely on. Unlike hit points, your character will usually be the one burning through their own willpower. You might spend points of willpower to cast a spell, or to use a heroic ability that maybe lets you make an extra attack or cleave through a foe. With these 2 attributes right here, focused on building these resource pools, no skills are tied to them whatsoever. To those consoling themselves that they'll get more hit points by improving your constitution when you level up, don't be so sure. These attributes, after being assigned, never increase again for as long as your character lives. Your skills, however, do change. So let's talk about those. After rolling up your attributes, you'll consult the skill table, page 25 of the core rules right here, and plug the base chance number correlated to your attributes number into any related skill. Now, there's a whole lot of gobbledygook words in there that you're probably not going to understand, so let's use Grim to break this down a little. As you can plainly see, I rolled a 16 for Grim's agility. A mighty good roll if I say so myself. If your character has an attribute score of 16, 17, or 18, they get a base chance of 7 per the guidelines from the handy-dandy table on page 25. Because of this, you'll notice Grim has a 7 in a lot of agility skills. This means that when I try to succeed on one of these skills, I have to roll a 7 or lower. That's right, kids. Dragonbane is what many a nerd, myself included, would call a D20 roll under game. Unlike Pathfinder or 5e, there are no modifiers here and no shifting DCs for a check. Anytime I roll to do anything, I know what numbers I need and what numbers signal a dreaded failure. You see, as my good friend Jack Panic of Dungeon Club fame once told me, D&D's DCs are dictated by the world around the characters, making every roll a moment that pits the player character against the surrounding environment. Meanwhile, Dragonbane's DCs are dictated by the player characters themselves, making every roll a test to see if they will overcome their own weaknesses, or if their own skills will fail them. Instead of the world dictating your player character's limitations, they dictate their own. But Mason, I hear you screaming through the screen. Y'all do that occasionally. Not all of Grim's agility skills have a 7 in them. One has a 14, another has an 8, and so on. What a very astute viewer you are, and with such remarkable eyesight. Sure enough, some of Grim's ability skills are higher than 7, and I'll explain why. As I mentioned earlier, 7 was Grim's base chance in regards to skills related to agility. In other words, that is the floor for Grim's agility skills. There are 2 ways that I can get them higher than that, one that's very immediate and another that's much more gradual. Let's talk about the 14s. Grim's got them in hunting and fishing, sneaking, bows, and knives. This is because these are some of the trained skills Grim started with at character creation. When a character is trained in something, they double its base chance for their starting skills number. This makes it so they're significantly more likely to succeed on trained skills than they are on untrained ones. Makes some intuitive sense. However, it also makes it harder to improve trained skills over time. That's right, kids. When your attributes will never move in the slightest, your skills have the chance to improve after every single session of Dragonbane. Should you critically succeed or critically fail on a roll during the session, mark the skill you were rolling with, and they might get higher. This rewards the skills characters use often, as the more you use a skill, the more often you have a chance to crit with it. Fear not, though, my dear unlucky rollers. Dragonbane will not leave you out in the cold. There's also a list of questions on page 29 in the core rules that your game master will run through at the end of every session. These questions include, but are not limited to, did you participate in the game in question? And did you defeat a dangerous adversary? For each yes, you can honestly give, mark another skill. This level up list is not necessarily inventive, I should admit. Other systems have used similar methods before. That doesn't stop the mechanic from being useful, though. Once you've got a few handfuls of marked skills, roll a d20 for each one. Whenever you roll a number higher than your skill's current number, increase it by 1 until you reach a maximum of 18. After all, the chance of failure is part of the fun. We're almost all wrapped up here. Dragonbane's just that easy to learn. But there are 2 final mechanical concepts I'd like to discuss before we dip out that don't quite fit into the flow of the video earlier on. You now know about attributes, skill generation, and almost everything there is to know about rolling dice in Dragonbane. These extra pieces I'm about to spell out for you are really just icing on top of this delicious conceptual cake we've cooked up together. First, we'll talk about boons and banes, a system that will feel familiar to the overwhelming majority of you. For all you 5e folks, boons and banes are functionally the disadvantage and advantage system you're familiar with. One, I'll hasten to point out, 5e borrowed from other games that came before it. If something helps you, roll an extra d20 and take the higher of the 2 rolls. If something hinders you, roll an extra d20 and take the lower of the 2. An important difference, though, between boons and banes and advantage and disadvantage is that there are no limits on the number of boons or banes you can have. So if you're strategic and or lucky enough, you can find yourself booning your way into 5 d20s and taking the highest of those rolls. However, if you are reckless and stupid enough, you might faceplant your way into 5 d20s and taking the lowest of all possible rolls. Dear viewer, from personal experience, I would advise you, do not be reckless and stupid enough. Next up, let's talk about pushing rolls. This is an optional rule you'll find on page 32 of our trusty rulebook, but playing without it seems absolutely mad to me. Please feel free to write a treatise telling me why I'm entirely off base in the comments section. What's this push a roll thing, you ask me? An easy enough question to answer. You see, each stat has a correlated condition that shows the wear and tear your character goes through. As long as you can give a good reason why your character should be able to take that condition, you can choose to take it and re-roll every single dice when you don't like the original outcome of the skill roll you got. If you had boons or banes, re-roll every one of those d20s you originally rolled. You take the new result and gain the condition, which, important to note, makes it so you get 1 more bane on every roll using that attribute until you get out of the fight and take a rest. In short, when moments matter most, you can trade another shot at success now for guaranteed worse odds at succeeding later. Tell me, how does that deal with the devil sound to you? Because when a single roll separates my player character from absolutely certain death, it sounds downright delicious to me. Well, folks, now you know almost everything you need for playing Dragonbane. Basically, every roll in every goal can be traced back to what we talked about today. Has the game piqued your interest? I hope so, because 2 more videos are coming about it. We'll talk soon about what might be the best part of the game. It's monsters. But before that, I'm going to record a more freewheeling video, totally unscripted, where you and I walk through the creation of Grimm's replacement. So you can be nice and familiar with the character creation process before you make your own avatar for this fantastic fantasy game. Until then, thanks for stepping through the rift into this wonderful game's world. I'll see you soon. Look at that knight. He has a kind of punchable face, though he'd kill me for doing it.
Okay, cool. What